This graph illustrates a major anomaly in modern lactation science. Breastfeeding initiation rates in regions like the UK are historically high, but right around the 6 to 8 week mark, we see a drastic drop-off. Quantitative research is perfectly designed to measure the what of this phenomenon. It gives us the specific metrics, the failure percentages, and the exact drop timelines. But quantitative data fails entirely to explain the why. A falling line on a chart cannot tell us what a mother is feeling or the exact sequence of events that led her to stop breastfeeding. Researchers rely on qualitative research to decode the subjective realities driving these dropping metrics. This is the process of taking messy, lived experiences, their exhaustion, their confusion, and structuring them into actionable data. Qualitative research does not test hypotheses with p-values or statistical significance. It builds a deep, contextual understanding of human behavior. For an IBCLC, simply measuring the failure rate of a clinical intervention is useless. You must understand the specific emotional reality that triggers that failure to effectively support your patients. There is a persistent clinical misconception that qualitative data is simply a collection of anecdotes or random patient opinions. In reality, it is systematically gathered, rigorously tested evidence of the maternal experience. Mastering these qualitative frameworks is required for any IBCLC. It is heavily tested on the board exams and absolutely critical for appraising medical literature. This study guide will map out the specific methodologies you need to know, examine how researchers maintain scientific rigor, and test your knowledge with IBCLC-style board questions. Translating the subjective experiences of patients into objective, evidence-based clinical practice requires mastering a specific architectural framework. Qualitative researchers operate within the interpretivist paradigm. This is the assumption that patients construct their own subjective realities based on their individual lived experiences. To study these subjective realities, researchers must choose one of 3 distinct methodological frameworks. The first is ethnography. This methodology is used to observe and document the behaviors, beliefs, and practices of a specific cultural or social group. Next is grounded theory. Researchers use this methodology when their goal is to generate an entirely new conceptual model or framework directly from raw data. Finally, there is phenomenology. This approach focuses on understanding the essence of a specific phenomenon directly from the viewpoint of the individuals experiencing it. While all 3 exist in the literature, phenomenology is the most prevalent and clinically relevant methodology in lactation studies, because it targets the exact internal experience of the breastfeeding mother. This raises a strict methodological question. How do we actually extract phenomenological data from a patient in a standardized way, without contaminating it with researcher bias? The primary vehicle for qualitative data collection is the in-depth, semi-structured interview. Unlike standard clinical questionnaires, semi-structured interviews strictly avoid yes or no questions. They are designed to eliminate leading clinical assumptions that might guide a mother to a specific answer. Instead, a researcher relies on broad, open-ended prompts, such as, "Can you tell me about your experience feeding your baby?" This open structure actively transfers power to the mother. It allows her to dictate the depth, the direction, and the emotional weight of the data provided. Abandoning rigid clinical questionnaires is the only scientific way to capture authentic, unanticipated emotional realities that a researcher didn't even know to look for. Once that data is collected, it must be evaluated for rigor, often termed trustworthiness in the literature. This is the qualitative equivalent to statistical validity, or p-values. The first pillar of rigor is verbatim transcription. Researchers cannot rely on memory or shorthand clinical notes. Every interview is audio recorded and transcribed word for word to create an exact record. The second pillar requires reflective field notes. Researchers use these notes immediately after an interview to actively acknowledge, isolate, and document their own clinical biases and positionality. The third pillar is inductive coding. Researchers read the transcripts multiple times to systematically group raw, verbatim statements into coherent categories. These categories are then combined into larger overarching themes. The final pillar is member checking. This is the process of returning the initial findings to the participants to ensure the researcher accurately interpreted their lived experience. Strict adherence to this architecture of rigor is what elevates qualitative research from a casual conversation into actionable, trustworthy clinical science. To see these methodologies applied in practice, we can look at a 2014 study by Spencer, Greatrex-White, and Fraser examining that exact 6 to 8 week breastfeeding drop-off. By applying a phenomenological approach, the researchers identified a core overarching theme among postnatal mothers: reality shock. The data revealed that women were entirely ill-prepared for the actual realities of breastfeeding, and the shock of the experience was overwhelming. The raw data driving this theme showed mothers possessing idealized expectations of innate biological ability that violently clashed with physical reality. One mother's verbatim transcript reads, "I was getting a little bit frustrated with myself. I was like, I ought to be able to do this." Through inductive coding, the researchers connected this shock to mothers deeply misunderstanding normal newborn behaviors. The participants were consistently misinterpreting wakeful states and cluster feeding as concrete proof that their milk supply was inadequate. The evidence demonstrates that these mothers aren't quitting because of biological failure. They are quitting because a lack of preparation causes them to misdiagnose normal infant behavior as a clinical emergency. These phenomenological findings can be connected directly back to actionable clinical intervention and policy changes. The discovery of reality shock exposes a flaw in standard antenatal education. It shows clinics are currently providing a dangerously idealized, frictionless version of breastfeeding. The clinical mandate is clear. To prevent the emotional drop-off at 8 weeks, clinicians must proactively educate parents on demanding and exhausting infant feeding cues before birth. Qualitative research identifies why the drop-off happens, providing the exact educational blueprint required to prevent it. Now, let's transition into the application phase with a rapid-fire board-style knowledge check. Question 1. A lactation researcher wishes to study the shared cultural beliefs regarding colostrum in a specific immigrant community. Which qualitative methodology is most appropriate? The correct answer is C. Ethnography is the specific methodology utilized when the focus is on the social and cultural realities within a given group. Question 2. In qualitative research, how do researchers primarily ensure the rigor or trustworthiness of their interview data? The correct answer is B. Rigor is maintained through meticulous transcription and researcher reflexivity, not through quantitative statistical measures or large sample sizes. Question 3. A phenomenological study reveals mothers frequently interpret normal newborn cluster feeding as insufficient milk supply. Based on this, what is the most appropriate action for an IBCLC? The correct answer is B. Qualitative findings should be utilized directly to inform and improve antenatal education, mitigating maternal anxiety before it leads to weaning. Mastering qualitative methodologies is the only way an IBCLC can bridge the gap between cold clinical data and the breathing reality of the breastfeeding mother. Review the cited studies in this guide to continue your exam preparation.